Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We will start just about 2 minutes after today. And thank you again for joining. We're really excited about today's speaker. And please mute. If you all don't mind, we'll keep everyone on mute so we can hear clearly. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Lindsay Cutler. I'm an attorney at the Center on Law and Poverty and a member of the Young Lawyers Division Board of Directors. And the division, along with the solo and small firm section, is very excited to host Cindy Zuniga-Sanchez of Xero Based Budget Coaching LLC today. In the course of the next 40 minutes, Cindy will cover strategies for attorneys to manage student loan debt, from repayment plans to consolidation and refinancing to public service loan forgiveness. Cindy is an attorney herself. She graduated in 2015 and founded Xero Based Budget in 2018. She has paid off $215,000 of student loan debt, and hosts presentations on financing and budgeting and student loans around the country. She's been featured on Good Morning America and in Forbes and now the State Bar of New Mexico. So today we will have about a 40-minute presentation, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. And I think the best way to do the Q&A is to do it in the chat. So if you have questions throughout, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And we'll try to answer them in order that we receive them. And feel free to and please keep yourselves on mute, and feel free to direct message me a question as well if you have one. And with that, Cindy, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Lindsay. So I'm really excited to, present to you all today to just talk, very, very candidly on student loans, on debt generally. I think that that's something that I wish I would have known in law school. I wish I would have known it right out of law school, but alas, here we are. So I have a presentation for you all. So I'm going to just pull it up. Just give me 1 second. And let me do that. Okay, there we go. All right. So today we're going to talk about managing debt, and importantly, we're going to talk about practical tips for financial freedom. And you'll notice that for the title of the presentation, I put financial freedom, not debt freedom, because debt freedom is a part of what the big picture that we want to achieve, which is ultimately financial freedom. Okay. And so I'm going to walk you all through that. And towards the end, we're going to have a Q&A where I want to just have candid discussion, about student loans and debt management and maybe whatever else you might have on your mind. Okay. So first, I want to tell you all a little bit about me, a little bit about myself. So first, talk about my journey to debt freedom. So as Lindsay mentioned, I am the founder of Xero Based Budget Coaching LLC. I practiced law full-time as a commercial litigation attorney for 6 years at a law firm here in New York City, which is where I'm from. And I recently left my job just last month to pursue my business full time and to just, focus on it, grow it. And so what do? Basically, I do all things personal finance education. And so I have a platform over on Instagram, an educational platform at Xero Based Budget. If you're into social media or anything, feel free to follow me there. And yeah, my story has been featured on various media outlets, mainly because of what I'm going to show you next. My debt. So I talk very candidly about my $215,000 of debt. And you see, a lot of times when I give these presentations, people are like, oh my goodness, that number is so outrageous. But with all of you, I'm talking to a bunch of lawyers or law students. And so you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. That's pretty on par maybe with what I have or with what I expect to have. So I decided to publicly speak about my journey to debt freedom with paying off my student loans because no one else was. I didn't see people on social media talking about their money specifically in this way, just having that candid conversation of, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to pay off these loans somehow. You see, I'm the daughter of immigrants, born and raised in the Bronx, low income community, a very typical daughter of immigrant story. And I didn't have much financial literacy growing up. So I didn't really understand the extent to, the amount of debt that I was getting myself into with law school. I knew it was going to be a lot, but I didn't really know quite how much. So I want to break down a little bit what was my $215,000 of debt. So no surprise here, 90% of it was from law school. So about $192,000 was attributed to law school, about 5% was attributed to undergrad debt, and about 5% was credit card debt. So, in case any of you have consumer debt, such as credit card debt, I totally get that. I understand it. I had about $12,000 of it when I graduated from law school. And so people ask me, Cindy, what was a moment that made you realize I need to educate myself on money? I need to understand how all of this works. So I call it my aha moment. And it was the moment that I realized that the $160,000 I had borrowed to go to school. You see, I borrowed $150 to go to law school. I borrowed $10,000 for undergrad. $160,000. That amount was actually going to grow to $240,000 due to interest. Yes, $80,000 would have gone just to interest. And it hit me, which was when I finished repaying in year one. I repaid my student loans per their instructions. They told me to pay $2,000 a month. And I did that. In year one, I paid $2,000 every month, which is extreme. I mean, it's higher than my rent. And I live in New York City, and that was higher than my portion of the rent. And, I realized that $20,000 of my $24,000 that I paid in that first year went to the interest, and only $4,000 went to the principal. And so, I'm preaching to the choir, right? We know the burden, the weight of debt. And this was kind of the moment where I realized I am never going to pay this off unless I really start educating myself more on money. And that's exactly what I did. And a big part of my story is that self-education that I did through podcasts, books, blogs, social media. And in doing that, thankfully, in December in 2019, I finished paying off all of my debt. And the key to doing that was to create a written plan. And I mean that. And I'm going to show you all, the steps towards that on pen and paper or a spreadsheet if you're that kind of person. Create a written plan to pay off your debt, whatever that situation looks like for you, and make additional payments. That was very important to me. It might not be necessary for you, and we'll talk about that, but it was definitely for me. All right, so let's buckle down. The 3 steps towards debt freedom. I'm a very pragmatic person. So even though I'm about inspiration, I'm about motivation, I'm also about like, okay, Cindy, what are the steps that I need to take? Like I need to deal with this debt, or Cindy, I'm about to graduate from law school. I need to understand what I'm going to do. This is for you. No matter where you are on the journey, whether you're a law student, out of law school, significantly out of law school, this is for you. Step 1. You need to understand your debt, like actually understand what we're dealing with here, and you need to confront your numbers. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand how debt works. And a lot of times this seems elementary, right? Like this seems like it's obvious, but it's not. It's not. And we need to understand the differences between principal and interest. That's a step 1. First of all, the principal is the amount that you originally borrowed. So in my example that I gave you all earlier, it was the $160,000. That is what I actually borrowed. But then there's the interest, and that's the killer. The interest is the fee that you pay in order to borrow that money. That's what the interest is. That in my story would have been the $80,000. So here's the example again, just to repeat, I took out 160, that was the principal. What I wound up repaying in the end was $203,000. So about $43,000 in interest, not $80,000, which was my original plan. Remember, I told you all, right? That original plan, I was going to have to pay $80,000 in interest, and I actually wound up repaying $43,000. More on that later. I'm going to talk about exactly why that happened and how I made that happen. Spoiler alert, it was refinancing, but I want to pause on that because we're going to talk about basically the pros and cons to refinancing, because I think it's important for people to know that too. All right, so I want us all to discuss this tweet, okay? I want you to leave your reaction, first of all, just like leave it in the chat, like, OMG, oh my goodness, or not surprising, whatever your reaction is when you see this tweet. See, this is a tweet that went viral a few years ago. And I remember when it went viral, and I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, how did this happen? Here's a tweet. It says, I graduated from law school 6 years ago with $250,000 of student loan debt. But after years of hard work and tens of thousands of dollars of payments, I can officially say that I now owe $315,000. Hooray. Sarcasm. Let's discuss this tweet. You see, some of your comments, right? Like, it's insane, sad, I fave it. It's a lot of times when people see this, it's like, well, why did that happen? Now, there are different ways to answer that. Like we can talk about the theoretical, the burden, the outrageousness of it all, the unjust system that we're dealing with here when it comes to student loans. We can talk about that for days. I want to talk about why this actually happened. Like mathematically, what happened here? That his student loans after 6 years went from 250 to 315. How did that happen? How did we go up $65,000 in balance if he's been paying tens of thousands of dollars? Why did that happen? Here's why, everyone. It happened because whatever Mr. Matt Lane was paying per month on his student loans was not enough to actually tackle the principal. It wasn't enough to even cover the interest. That is why that happened. It is because his monthly payment was not even sufficient to satisfy the interest. Remember what the interest is, that fee that you have to pay, let alone the principal. So if you can't even touch the interest, you're not touching the principal. I'm a very visual person. So I imagine the student loan as that, do you know that iPhone emoji of that like red, furry, ugly monster? That is the principal. That's what I want you to picture in your head, okay? The student loan, the principal, what you actually borrowed is that little red, furry monster. The interest is basically kind of what's around the monster. We need to take care of the interest first, really, before we're able to actually tackle and hit the principal. Without covering the interest, without giving the banks their money, because they will always get their money, we're not going to actually be able to get to the amount we borrowed. And so that's why this happened. Mathematically speaking, that's why it happened, because his payment, whatever the payment was not enough to even cover the interest, let alone the principal. So it is really important, with all of that said, that you all do this thing, which is gather your numbers. After our call today, it could be today, it could be tonight, it could be this weekend, you know, whenever you have time. But this is important to do, is I want you to gather these 4 pieces of information when it comes to your debt. First is you're going to gather the type. Do you have a federal loan? Do you have a Perkins loan, a Parents Plus loan? Like, what kind of debt do you have? If you can, break it down to like whether it's subsidized, unsubsidized. For those of you that might not be familiar, a subsidized loan is one in which the federal government essentially is subsidizing your interest while you're in school. So interest is not accumulating on the loan while you're in school. And many of you probably had those for undergrad. For undergrad, it's very popular for us to get those, you know, subsidized loans. However, for law school, we get the unsubsidized loans. And that is that interest is actually accruing as soon as your loan is dispersed. So as soon as your 1L year, that first disbursement up for, I don't know, $20,000 or whatever it was, as soon as that hit your, you know, your bank account, or well, paid the school and maybe a portion hit your bank account, you know, depending on what kind of debt you took on to pay your living expenses, et cetera, the interest started accruing right then. So you were, you know, in your classroom and interest was accruing. I didn't really appreciate that. I didn't really understand that when I was in the classroom, the interest on my student loans was already growing. It was accumulating. So what kind of debt do you have? What type of debt do you have? Number 2 is going to be what's the balance? What's the actual amount that you owe now presently on that debt? Now, keep in mind, this applies to any kind of debt. You see, some of you have car payments, some of you have credit cards, okay? So write it out. Like, don't just put credit card debt. No, put Bank of America card, Capital One, you know, credit card, your JetBlue credit card, whatever it may be. Write that out, write the balance attributed to it. Next thing is you're going to put down the interest rate. This is extremely important to do. So many people simply do not know what the interest rate is on their loans. And I know what some of you are thinking. Some of you are saying, well, Cindy, right now, if I log into my student loans because of the federal, the pause on federal student loans, the interest rate says 0. So that means it's 0, right? No, it's not. It's temporarily zero, and that's great, but it's not going to stay that way. It seems that it is going to kick back up in October. It's through September that this pause. So something simple is just look back at like a past statement on what the interest rate was on those loans, just so you can have that information. And the last thing you want is your minimum payment. So this is basically something that you should have, you know, when all is said and done, you should have a debt overview that looks something like this. You know, type of debt, your balance, your minimum payment, and your interest rate. Okay, so again, recapping, step number 1, understand your debt and confront your numbers. It's ugly. It's not sexy. It's not, but you have to do it. It's absolutely necessary. Okay, so once we do that, we go to step number 2. You need to calculate your additional payment. Yes, you need to calculate an additional payment. You see, additional payments are key, because if we just pay the minimum on anything, our credit card, our student loan, it's going to be extremely difficult to get out of it.
Hi, can I put in an order for pickup?
Can we go ahead and can we make sure everyone's on mute, please?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think we're good now.
Sorry, Sydney.
All right. Yeah. Just a reminder, everyone, if you can just mute yourselves, that'd be great. Okay. So your budget which I'm going to show you an example of one. Your budget is going to tell you how much you can afford to put extra towards your debt. And it's going to tell you whether you need to decrease some of your expenses or maybe you need to increase your income. But your budget is key to informing you on, okay, this is the additional payment you can make on your debt. So other ideas for you all is consider applying these towards your debt. Your bonus, if you have one, if you get one, a salary increase, as you move along your careers. If you're a bi-weekly paycheck earner, there are 2 months in the year where you get a third paycheck in the month instead of just 2. Don't just spend that paycheck. Don't just wonder afterwards, I wonder where that money went. No, give it a purpose. Give it a purpose. Maybe you put a portion towards your debt. But the point is that you want to make sure that you give it a purpose. And speaking of giving it a purpose, when I told you all that your budget will tell you how much you can put towards, as an additional payment, I'm a fan of, unsurprisingly, the zero-based budget. So a zero-based budget is an actual budgeting method. And it's where all of your income, if you want to just look at your screens really quick, what's in the blue, your income is broken down by every dollar. So every dollar that you expect to bring in any given month gets a job. So let's look at the example here. Okay, let's look at the example here. This person earns $5,000 net pay. So after taxes, after everything gets taken out, like what actually is their direct deposit, $2,500 each paycheck, 2 paychecks a month, $5,000 a month. Okay, great. What do we do now? We need to give a job to all $5,000. This is how I budget, by the way. This is how I budgeted during my debt-free journey. This is how I budget now, even though I'm a year and a half out of debt, I still do this. Does everyone have to budget this way? Absolutely not. But I do think it's really important, at least for this step, to help you calculate what your additional payment can be. This is going to be really important. So you'll see that this person puts $800 towards savings and investments. Then, we go to their expenses. We don't need to go in detail, but $2,800 goes to their monthly expenses. $1,000 goes towards their debt right now. And $1,000 is, for many, it can be a shock. But for lawyers, a lot of times this is what our minimum payment looks like. It's really high. And so when they do this exercise, they realize that what they have left over, when you break down your income in this way, is $400. So now you will have a $400 additional payment that you can make towards your debt. This is going to depend on everyone. No, I can't tell you all to follow blanket piece of advice. No, because everyone is going to be different. Some of you are going to do this exercise and you're going to realize that you're really, really tight. You're very much paycheck to paycheck. The only way that we resolve that is we decrease expenses or we increase the income. Mathematically, that's all we can do. Okay. And so the more that you're able to really expand that gap, right? Expand that gap from your income to what you need to pay out, which is like your debt and your expenses, that's the more room you have for your financial goals. And so I encourage all of you, as part of step number 2, even if you just do this once, even if you're like, okay, the zero-based budget sounds cool, but I know myself, I'm not going to follow that to a T, from now on, that's okay. But at least do this once, at the very least, to show you what your additional payment could be towards your student loans or any other debt. It could be credit cards, it can be whatever. Okay. And in case I haven't convinced you about the importance of an additional payment towards your debt, I hope this does. So here I used one of my favorite tools. I encourage all of you to use this. This is the Credit Karma Debt Repayment Calculator. You can just Google that, Credit Karma Debt Repayment Calculator. It's a brilliant tool. Highly recommend all of you to use it. And here we have a hypothetical person that has what's considered the average student loan amount, which is about $30,000. Now, our student loans are probably a lot higher than $30,000, but we're using what is considered average in the United States. And you'll see the top example. This person tells me, well, Cindy, I have a $500 monthly payment on my $30,000 loan. My interest rate is at 7%, which is about right for grad school type of loans. I mean, I had some of my loans were at about 9%. They were really, really high. This person at 7%, just hypothetical. And their expected debt payoff is 75 months. So if they pay $500 towards their $30,000 balance at 7% interest, it's going to take them about 75 months to pay it off. I tell them, consider an additional $100 payment. And they're like, oh, that's not really going to make a big difference. Just $100. Like, is that really going to make a dent in my student loans? Well, yes, it is. Take a look at the bottom half. If instead of a $500 monthly payment, you do a $600 monthly payment, this person would not only save $1,500 in interest, $1,500. You can take a nice trip somewhere, go somewhere with that money, okay? But this person also shaves 15 months off of their debt repayment time frame. 15 months, that's over a year. So you're saving $1,500 in interest and you're shaving off 15 months by just making an additional $100 payment. Sometimes people think that, oh, I need to throw in additional thousands of dollars every month. No, just start small. And if you're like, well, Cindy, what's the right amount for me? Check out that debt repayment calculator. It's a really, really good tool to use and it's free. Step number 3. All right. So again, let's recap. Step number 1, you're going to understand your debt. You're also going to confront your numbers. Step number 2, you're going to calculate, what is my additional payment going to be? What does that look like? Now, step number 3, you're going to choose a debt payoff strategy. And yes, there's a strategy. Well, there are 2 actually, which I'm going to show you all. So the first step is you need to use your debt overview. You need to understand, what are the numbers looking like? How many debts do you have? I've had clients that have 1 debt. I've had clients that have had 10, 12. It's really going to depend on you and your debt overview. And this is what you're going to do. You can create this, in a spreadsheet. You can do pen and paper, whatever is easiest for you. But this is a critical part towards, for the step. So here I have my friend Anna. Anna comes to me and she says, Cindy, I did the homework. I followed the steps. I did my budget. I, understood what my debt numbers looked like. My additional debt payment can be $300. That's how much I can put additionally towards my debt. After taking into consideration all of my other goals, my expenses, etc., this is what I can do. And I say, great, Anna, $300. Let's see how we should apply that. See, a lot of people would look at Anna's example, just look at the screen here, and they'll say, well, Cindy, she has an extra $300. Should she just do like $100 extra to each debt? See, she has a Chase credit card at a $4,000 balance, a federal loan at a $24,000 balance, and a private loan at $2,000 balance. I have the minimum payments on there, and I also have the interest rates. So some people would say, well, just put a little bit more than the minimum on all of them. That's not the most efficient way to do it, though. Here's what I like to do. One of 2 strategies. Strategy number 1 is called the debt snowball method. In this method, what you're going to do is you're going to list all of your debts from smallest dollar amount to largest. So if you have some credit cards that you owe like $500 to $600, those small little debts, priority. That's the priority because that's how we're going to list these debts. And the way this works is that you are going to make minimum payments. Hear me out, everyone. Minimum payments on all of your debt, except for the one that's the priority, the one that you listed as the top priority, which in this case for the debt snowball is the smallest debt. And that's the one that you're going to tackle. That's the one that you're going to prioritize. Just knock it out, get rid of it. The way the snowball works is that once you've done that, you're going to roll over not just the payment, the regular payment on that small debt, but also that additional amount that you applied. You're going to put that to the second smallest debt, and then the third, and then you're going to go all the way until you get to the largest one, which is most likely your student loan, until you get to the largest one. Okay. So why do we like this method? We like it because it's motivational. It gives you quick wins, right? The quick wins are getting rid of those small little pesky debts. What's the con? It could cost you more. It could cost you more because notice that I have not talked about interest rates right now at all. So if you're like, well, Cindy, what if the, largest debt happens to have the highest interest rate? Like, don't you care about that? Yes, I do, but I care about that more for the second method. The first method, I really only care about the amount, the balance. And I have an example here of how this would work. Okay, for Anna is that we would first hit the private loan, which remember that had the $2,000 balance, that had the smallest balance. That's the one that we would focus our energy on first. And then we would move to the Chase card and then finally the federal loan. So you need to be calculated when you are doing your debt attack plan, and you need to take it one by one. This doesn't mean you ignore all of your other debts. It just means that you're being strategic about it. Method number 2, the debt avalanche method. Here we make minimum payments on all of our debts, just like the first example with the debt snowball. But here we're going to pay off our debt in the order highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. So whatever has the highest interest rate, when you did this homework of the debt overview, whatever has the highest interest rate, that's what we want to clear out first. So why do we like this? Well, because it's cost effective, right? Because we are the debts that have the highest interest actually cost us the most. So I'm looking at you, credit cards, those 20% interest rates on credit cards, those high, yeah, we want to get rid of those first. Now, again, the pro, it's cost efficient. The con is you might not get the quick win that you're looking for. If you're, for example, if you have a credit card that has like a $5,000 balance with 25% interest rate, that can be maybe a little discouraging for you. So it's really going to depend on you. So with Anna's example, if we do the debt avalanche method, we would be paying the Chase credit card first. Why? Because that had the highest interest rate. And then we would go on to the other ones. Before we go to the last part, which is the options I want you all to consider, a lot of times people ask me, well, Cindy, which method should I pick? Should I go snowball? Should I go avalanche? And I tell them whatever is going to get you to pay off the debt. I don't care. There's no right or wrong. It's just whatever gets you motivated to actually pay off your debt. Okay. So now the last part of this presentation before we dive into Q&A is options I want you all to consider and things I want you to be aware of. Okay. So first is repayment options. Now, you're going to see so many different repayment options. And I think the best source for it is studentaid.gov. Okay, that's going to be the best resource for you. But these are some of the most common type of repayment plans that you will see when you graduate is you're going to be given options. Now, keep in mind, this is for federal loans. Remember, we have federal loans. We also have private loans. Private loans are ones that they're going to, specific terms are going to cover those private loans. And that's why those private loans, they're kind of like their own beast, really. You need to be mindful of what the repayment options are for your private loans. There's much less flexibility with those. These, I'm talking about federal loans. Okay. So with federal loans, which for most of us will make up the bulk of our student loans, you're going to be presented with a standard repayment option, which is typically 120 months or 10 years. That's kind of the standard repayment option. See, mine originally was the standard repayment option. It was 10 years. And that's why my minimum payment was $2,000. Now, I went into a large law firm in New York City, $2,000. Yes, it was a lot, but I could afford to do it. So what if you're like, Cindy, I'm not there? Okay, well, then that's where you go to the income-based repayment type of options. That is where you need to certify with the government what your income is, the government will look at that number and will then calculate what your minimum payment will be. A big thing to know about that. When you are on IBR, you need to be mindful that it is very, very possible that your minimum payment, like our friend Matt Lane, the individual whose tweet went viral, it is very possible that your minimum payment doesn't even cover the interest. And that is why you will see your loan amount increase. It's going to happen. And I say that it's going to happen not to be negative, but it's because I feel like a lot of people are not aware that that happens. All right, so it's important to understand. And then there's also the extended repayment plan. The extended repayment plan is typically when you are on a repayment plan to, pay off your student loans in 25 years. So of course, your payment is going to look a lot lower. And this could be really appealing to some people. What I want you to keep in mind, though, is when all is said and done and you pay off those loans in 25 years, you are very likely going to wind up paying about triple the amount that you originally borrowed. Easily. It could be like triple the amount. So that's why I also want you to keep this in mind. Okay, it's good to know what are your options. Okay, but one of the best resources, like I said, studentaid.gov. Go there. Let's talk loan forgiveness. So there is PILSIF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, which I'm going to cover next. That's the federal program that has very strict requirements. We're going to go through each of those requirements next. But there are also state and local forgiveness programs. For example, here in New York State, there's a teacher loan forgiveness program. So this is for my friends that are teachers, for example. Lawyers, I don't know that New York State has anything like that. I don't know that New Mexico has one like that. If there's a state-specific program, leave it in the chat. That would be great to know. But sometimes there are sometimes state and local forgiveness programs, which it's worth looking into. There also could be employer forgiveness programs. Now, typically, these programs aren't like they're going to cover tens of thousands of dollars of your loans. One of my friends, she just got her employer to forgive $5,000 of her loans. Well, not forgive, but like basically they paid off $5,000 of her student loans, which was obviously, that's something that's really great. It never hurts to ask. Just ask your employer, do they have a program available? And also understand the terms of that program. See, some employers, including my friends, they require you to be with them for a certain amount of years. So you want to make sure that you're equipped with that. All right, let's dive into the big one now, the one that I know all of you want to talk about, which is public service loan forgiveness, okay? And this is for those who are employed by a nonprofit organization, okay? They may be eligible for federal public service loan forgiveness. So how does this work? Well, there are certain requirements that you need to meet. First of all, you must be employed by a qualified nonprofit organization or government, okay? A lot of people that, for example, work in the courts, district attorneys' offices, any type of really like public service could qualify. Please make sure that your employer actually qualifies. You might think it's obvious. You might think, well, of course they do. Just check it. It takes you little to no time to just check and ensure that your employer is covered. And we're going to talk about next exactly how we make sure that that happens. Next thing is you need to work full-time, not part-time. You need to be working full-time for that entity. Next, you need to have direct loans. I should have put this in red. I should have put stars on here, bold. They must be direct loans. Or you can consolidate your any other federal student loans that you have into a direct loan. Direct loans are the ones that qualify for student loan forgiveness. And that's a big mistake that people make. Another thing is you need to repay your loans under an income-driven repayment plan. For example, the income-based repayment plan, the one that we just talked about just now, that's an example of one, okay? Another one is you need to make 120 qualifying payments. Meaning if the government says, Christine, your payment is $240 every month, Christine needs to make sure that she pays 120 payments of $240 a month. Now, does it need to be consecutive? No. Notice they don't say make 10 years straight of qualifying payments. That is not the requirement. It is 120 qualifying payments, meaning that you can take a break from public service and come back. Let's talk about common mistakes because these are very, very common. Remember when we were talking about, does your employer qualify? Well, there's a form for that. You need to submit your employer certification form. A lot of people forget to do this. Why? A lot of people forget that they actually need to do something in order to be in this program. You don't just automatically get enrolled in public service loan forgiveness. That does not happen. You need to put something on your part. One of them being you need to submit this employer certification form annually. A lot of people make the mistake of failing to consolidate loans into a direct loan, also a big mistake. Sometimes people forget to enroll in a qualified repayment plan, such as income-based repayment. And also sometimes people forget that they need to make timely, on time, they need to make timely payments, 120 payments throughout in order to actually receive public service loan forgiveness. All right, so the last topic I want to touch on before we take questions is refinancing. So you know that earlier I said that I saved about $40,000 by refinancing my student loans. So what is refinancing? Refinancing is when you take on a new loan with a private lender. That lender is going to pay off whatever debt you want to have refinanced. And now your debt is with that new lender. For me, I had my refinancing company pay off all of my student loans, federal, private. I had different types of student loans. They paid all of that off. And now I had an agreement with this new lender to pay them instead of the federal government. I no longer had any debt with the federal government. Why do you do this? Well, I did it because of the lower interest rate. Like I told some of you, like I told you, some of my debt was at 9% and 7%, and I was able to refinance at 4%. That saved a lot of money. Also, it shortened my repayment period. And so that was really great. Now, something also to consider is that currently at this moment, 2021, interest rates are at a historical low. However, because the economy is increasing, is getting better, and because of guidance from the Fed that said that the interest rates will be increasing soon, this is something that regardless if it's student loans or mortgages or whatever it may be, people are thinking about, okay, maybe refinancing now would be a good time to do so. But refinancing is not for everyone. It is not for everyone. This is not for you. First of all, big, bold letters. If you want to do PILSIF, if you want to do public service loan forgiveness, you do not refinance. Do not refinance because that removes you from eligibility for forgiveness. Don't do that. It also removes you from eligibility for income-based repayment options. Like we spoke about IBR. You don't get IBR if you have a new loan with a new lender. You also have limited options when it comes to forbearance or deferment, depending on the lender, depending on who you sign up with, okay? You can also do something called partial refinancing. So if you're like, well, Cindy, I have $100,000 in federal loans and I have a $20,000 private loan that has a 10% interest rate. Well, you can refinance that private loan. You don't need to refinance everything. So you can leave the $100K federal loan, you can leave that to the side, and you can refinance your private loan so that you can save on interest and time, right? So, all right, I think, did I skip one? Oh yeah, so refinancing was right for me. I explained that already. I saved about $37,000. These are some lenders that I recommend. Common Bond, Earnest, Credible. SoFi is the company that I went with. That is the company that was right for me. But of course, I want to present the options to all of you, okay? And the last one is my favorite free tools for you is make sure that you are capturing all of your debts. And a great way to do that, the way to do that is please pull your annual credit report. It is free at annualcreditreport.com. Please pull your credit report. It is going to show you all of the debts that are under your name. And then again, for debt repayment calculator, my favorite one is from Credit Karma, and a debt repayment tracker, NerdWallet has an excellent one for that. So those are some of my favorite free tools. And with that, we're at our Q&A. So I want to thank you all for listening. I want to encourage you all to, leave your questions. This time is for you. And yeah, that's it. Hope you all enjoy the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cindy. I'm going to uplift a question I got via direct message first. And that's whether the repayment debt calculator you mentioned, that's the Credit Karma debt calculator. Can that tell you how much it costs for like a snowball method or an Avalanche, or is there another tool that you recommend for that? For instance,
I think that the NerdWallet one might have like which method you should go with. But that I like where your headspace is at already. Like, yes, there are online calculators where you can calculate like which method is going to be right for me. Do I go snowball? Do I go avalanche? But I just want to keep in mind that the debt avalanche will be the cost-effective one. That's going to be the one that's going to save you the most money. The debt snowball one, however, is the one that's going to possibly keep you motivated on the journey. So ultimately, no matter what the calculators say, it's going to come down to your personality, and it's going to come down to what you're prioritizing. Or you could also do a hybrid type of situation. It could be, well, you know what? I definitely want to get rid of these small little credit cards. I'm kind of not really looking at the interest rate because I know that they're little and I just want to get rid of them. And then I'll move on and maybe do the avalanche, for example. So you can adjust. This is your journey and you should be flexible. Well, welcome, embrace flexibility, because it can be a long journey and it can be a little daunting.
Awesome. Thank you. So another question, curious about the consolidation process, insight for new graduates.
Yeah. So if we're talking about like the federal loan, like consolidating them into direct loans, what you want to do is the first step that I want you all to do is look at what kind of debt you have. Look at the name. Like it'll say something like unsubsidized XYZ loan or this kind. Look at those kinds of debts. Like what is it that you have? And then you're going to be able to see, oh, I think these are the ones that I'm going to need to consolidate into a direct loan. Now, I will leave the link in the chat. You want to make sure that with studentaid.gov that you are talking to someone if you have any other questions when it comes to specifically, the consolidation process. They have experts. This is what they do, and they will walk you through, whether it's as easy as going through some prompts online, or whether you have to, or the forms that you're going to have to submit, because you are going to have to submit some forms too. But the first step is that you're going to have to log in to your account. I'm going to leave this in the chat. And so that whoever's watching the recording knows, the link is studentaid.gov/app/, this says launch consolidation. I think it should say loan consolidation, but the link does look active. If in case of anything, just put studentaid.gov direct consolidation loan application, and you will see that the application is there, but you will need to have your login. That's another thing. Make sure that you have your login information. A lot of times people will be like, I don't even know my login. That's okay if that's you. Just make sure that you have that information, because then it'll walk you through the process. And if anything, please just get someone on the phone.
We're getting a couple questions here about public service loan forgiveness.
Yeah, sure. It's the hot one.
Yep. So there's a question around the risk of refinancing versus loans that could have otherwise been forgiven. And then I'll add to that sort of a two-part, if you could expand like what's happening with the end of all the federal 0% type programs and what that means for public service loan forgiveness?
Yes.
Folks that are on that track.
Excellent question. So Cindy, I haven't paid on my student loan since March. How does this impact student loan forgiveness? Well, good news for you is that even though you weren't making payments from March until September, so I think that's 18 months, that's 18 payments that you get off the bat for you. So they will count 18 payments towards your 120. That's pretty amazing without having to actually make those payments. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. However, what I do want you to be sure that you are mindful of is the employer certification form. Please make sure that you are submitting that annually. Even now with the pandemic and everything happened, please make sure that you are up to date for that. In terms of what's going to happen now, in September, it doesn't seem that the Biden administration is going to be extending the pause on payments and the pause on the 0% interest rate. What's going to happen now is that repayment starts. At least right now. Now, I'm not a wizard. I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea what they're actually going to do. I wish I did. But, what it looks like is in October, we're going to have to start repaying our student loans again. And we're going to be at whatever interest rate our student loans were locked in at. So I want you all, of course, to keep that in mind. Now, I'm not sure, Lindsay, if I understood that first part of your question, which was something about refinancing. I just want to make sure I'm clear on the question.
Yes. So is there any downside to getting a refinancing interest rate quote? And second to that, if you're, should you make a payment if it's at 0% interest and you're on the PLSF track? And I want to make sure we answer both of those because I think that last one's really important.
Yeah.
And
so
then,
the first one on the refinancing, getting a quote doesn't hurt to get a quote. Now, it could slightly impact your credit if these potential lenders are looking into your credit history. So I do want you to be mindful of that. Is that going to drop your credit score by like 20, 30 points? No. Like it should not at all, right? This should be it's going to be an inquiry, but it's not going to have that dramatic of an effect. For some, however, and you can ask them like, are you going to do an inquiry into my credit? If they say yes, you'll know that you'll have some effect. If they say no, well then, okay, fine. It doesn't hurt to shop around just to see what's out there. However, if you are trying to pursue public service loan forgiveness, do not refinance. Okay. Another thing is if you are pursuing public service loan forgiveness, do not make an additional payment right now because you don't need to. Remember, the requirement is 120 qualified payments. You've already made 12, 13, 14, 15, or whatever it's been. Even if you're like, well, Cindy, I haven't. Well, yes, you have, because that's what the government is counting these months towards your qualified payments. If in the end, they're ultimately going to forgive your student loans after the 120, then why make additional payments? The only way that I want you to make additional payments is if you're not on that track. If you're like on the Cindy track where you are paying off your student loans, then yes, I want you to make additional payments, to the extent possible, even during this pause. Of course, I would love for you to have like your emergency fund in place and prioritize, your financial health generally, not just debt, but also ensuring that you have your, your emergency fund in place, because that's really important too.
Awesome. Now, what about, we're getting some questions around, paying down student loans versus saving for other things, like aiming to buy a house or saving up for retirement.
Yeah. So here's my like general rule. Now, this is like, look, this is not financial advice. I don't know your individual situations. This is like a general, thought that I want you all to consider. The first priority before anything is you need to have your emergency fund in place. People want to save for a home down payment and have like $100 in savings in case of an emergency. No. We need to have a solid emergency fund in place first and foremost. Now, typically I want you to start with about 1 month of necessary living expenses. So what's enough to cover 1 month for you? Let's say that's $3,000. $3,000 would cover your rent, your groceries, your credit card bills, whatever it is. So then I want you to have $3,000 in a separate savings account. Now, ideally, after you hit the $3,000, you want to go ahead and save 3 to 6 months of necessary living expenses. Now, this is going to depend on your situation. Are you the only income earner? Is your job your only income source? Well, then that could be a little riskier than if it's not your only income source, or if you have a spouse, for example, that also is working. So that's going to depend on you, on whether you want to go for 3 months, whether you want to go for 6 months. But I want you to at least start with 1 month and having that in a completely separate account. Now, that's a first step, because our emergency fund is what's there if, things get a little crazy. And I mean, we've all seen a little crazy this past year. So we want to make sure we're protecting ourselves first and foremost. Second of all is when it comes to the 401k, so a retirement plan, I at least would love for you to get the employer match. So if your employer matches, we want to make sure that we're contributing at least what the employer matches. Well, why? Because if you don't, you're leaving free money on the table. That's a 100% return on your investment if you take full advantage of the employer match. Okay. The third question is going to be, all right, well, what about like investing or saving for a house down payment or this or that? That is where you need to really assess, well, what is your priority? And how can you balance all of it? And the way that I want to encourage all of you to see how this kind of looks is look at that the sample Xero-based budget that I did. This session is being recorded. I encourage you all to just go back to the video, take a quick look at that budget. I am also releasing for those on my email list, a little shameless plug here, a free budget template complete with a video tutorial to my community next week. So if you want to join my email list, no strings attached. This is going for free. It's a free resource to you. If you want like a model template that you could just pop in your numbers, I am doing that. You can sign up at www.xero-basedbudget.com. Just be sure that you're subscribed to my mailing list and you will receive that. And use the budget so that you can understand, well, how can I make room for my various goals? Your budget will tell you what you can do, because the budget is not something that's restrictive or ugly, or no, it's your money plan. That's what it is. Okay. So highly recommend that you do that. I'm not a one size fits all, one blanket piece of advice for everyone, because that's absolutely impossible. So that's how I like to do a balanced approach. But first, your emergency fund. Emergency fund is key.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I'm going to ask like 2 quick, what I hope are yes or no questions.
Yeah, go for it.
With public service loan forgiveness, you don't have to have the same employer the whole time. Is that correct?
No, you don't. But you need to make sure that you're working for a qualified employer. And so I want to make sure that even when you do switch jobs, that you are still within that umbrella. So I have a friend that was working at the Manhattan DA's office, then left for the private sector, now is coming back to government, but not in like the DA capacity. That's a perfect example of that can happen. You just need to make sure you're on top of things.
Awesome. And if you make multiple income-based repayments in a month, those are not qualified payments. Is that correct?
Yeah, because that's the thing. That's an additional, So that's the thing. So with the qualified payments, it's 120 qualified payments each payment. Typically, please just log into your portal to ensure. It's typically like, it'll show you when that payment is due. And so if you just make another payment, it's going to count it as an additional payment, not like per your schedule. So just be mindful of that. But of course, please log into your portals. I think it's really, really important. And I think there was a question, which I hope I answered, Nikki, which was about the 120 consecutive payments. It is not 120 consecutive payments. It's 120 qualified payments. So the 120 consecutive payments can take you 15 years. It really depends on your situation.
Thanks for that clarification. And then the last thing I'd love for you to touch on is, I know you say you don't have a crystal ball here, but with any potential,
my imaginary crystal ball.
with any potential for forgiveness, if you refinance that federal loan forgiveness, you're taken out of that. Is that correct? Like any possibility of that?
Yes, because now you have a binding agreement with a completely different lender. Like they're like, look, I don't care that like Biden just decided to forgive, $10,000, let's just say, right? If there's like a miracle and President Biden says, yeah, we're going to do this, they don't care. The private companies don't care. They have nothing to do with that, and that is a risk that you take because you don't know. I mean, none of us know what's going to happen. Now, I do think that something might happen in the future. However, I don't know that it's going to happen through the executive branch. I think that what they want is for Congress to do something, which technically Congress could right now of all times because we have the House and the Senate. But we don't know. Like we don't know what's going on. You will all see there is one specific. If you just give me like 20 seconds really quick, I want to look up the author for you. There's an author that writes for Forbes and he talks all about student loans. Like if you want to know the up-to-date student loans, everything, forgiveness, interest rates, what's going on, please follow him. He is absolutely great. His name is Zach Friedman. He just came out with an article yesterday about how the Biden administration has actually canceled $3 billion of student loans. They've already done that. And so I got some messages from people on Instagram like, Cindy, what is this? Like, do I qualify? Like, am I under this? And the thing is that there are a lot of different types of student loans. For example, people that attended certain for-profit institutions, people with certain like disabilities, people that were in certain programs, so I will link the article in case you're curious. For those of you that are watching the recording, you can look up the article that was released June 16th. It is called Biden Has Now Canceled $3 billion of Student Loans. Just check it out. And also check out the author that writes the article because he is in the know. So if anything happens, like that's the author that you want to go to, and also has, just always links great resources. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We will see what happens. I am very in favor of student loan forgiveness, very much so. I would love for student loans to be canceled. I just don't know that that's going to happen. And so because of that, it is important that we equip ourselves with the information so that at least if you are eligible for something like public service loan forgiveness, which to be clear is completely different than the Biden, like student loan cancellation. That's something completely different. I want you all to know the options available to you. And it's good. It's important for us to know this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for your time and that plan that you mentioned. Will you drop your email briefly in the chat? If folks are interested in signing up for that?
I will drop it. Yep, I will drop it. Sign up for my mailing list. You will get that budget template in the next week. And it's, I hope that it's a free resource to you, and I hope that it's valuable to you and, on your journeys.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. This has been an incredible presentation and it was recorded, so it will be up on the website shortly.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you.